Start by removing both the negative and positive side of the battery. We will be working near the starter, and even with the car off, it can shock you really bad. For most factory batteries, it's going to be an 8mm socket. However, if your car has had new cable ends put on before, it may be a different size, and that's pretty common. Now we're going to lift the car into the air on the front. So we came in with our jack here towards the back and lifted up so that we had room to place our jack stand. You want to make sure that it's cradling this beam perfectly, and you do want it up pretty high and pretty far forward on that beam. Now we're going to go around to the other side and put another jack stand in that same place. So as you're lifting the other side of the car, pay very special close attention to the jack on this side and make sure that it's still secure and not being tipped over. On each side of the car, the exhaust goes up to the exhaust manifolds, and you have two 15mm bolts. So we're accessing these using a long extension and a 15mm socket. So there's two of them on each side, and I highly recommend shooting some liquid wrench on these bolts first and letting them soak for a minute. It really helps out. So you got two on each side that we'll be going after. To make it easier, instead of unscrewing these O2 sensors, you can simply just unplug them. So you push down on the tab and then pull them apart. And sometimes it helps to put a screwdriver between it and pry it if you need to. So you want to do that to the O2 sensors on both sides here. Okay, we're going to go ahead and remove the dust shield here. And so it's just a 3/8 inch socket, one little bolt here on the back, and by removing this we'll have better access to our O2 sensor, which are up here. We're going to use a 7/8 inch wrench to break it loose and unscrew it, since it's pretty hard to reach that connector at the top. So we went ahead and broke this O2 sensor loose with a 7/8 inch wrench. And now we're just spinning it to unscrew it. If you're careful not to bind the wires too much, you can just unscrew it and it will come out. Okay, so there it is, hanging there now. We'll just do the same thing on the other side. Okay, go ahead and break the passenger side O2 sensor loose up on the front. Once you get it loose, you can unspin that one by hand. So next, to get the exhaust nuts on the passenger side, we're using a long extension with a swivel in order to get the right angle, and then a deep socket to go over the stud. I have been able to switch to a 1/2 inch drive socket, which acts somewhat like a deep socket to get over the stud, but is better clearance for where it's rounded right there. But anyway, looks like that worked just fine, so we're going to take off the other nut that's on the bottom side of that. So next is we're unbolting the mid pipe to the catback. You want to put some nice rags over your exhaust tips, because as we disconnect this, the exhaust can move around. You don't want to mark up your bumper. Next, we're unbolting the exhaust where the mid pipe meets the catback. So you're going to take a 15mm socket to undo these nuts. And if it's factory, the stud should stay in place. If not, you'll have to put a socket on one side and then come around to the other side with another socket. But it has these nice tabs from the factory that will spin and hit the exhaust and keep everything from moving. Now it's best just to get underneath the car, and you're going to be shaking the exhaust loose and disconnecting it from the back here. Put your foot on a muffler if you need to kind of separate everything. But it might take some shaking, but you're just going to basically drop it straight down. So now you'll just drop this down out of the way. You might have to shake it around. And then you can just work your way back and slide yourself out from underneath the car with it. Next, we're removing the starter, which is connected to the front of the transmission here, and it has 3 bolts. There's one here, there's one here, and then there's one that's somewhat out of sight, and as you see, we have our wrench on it. It's just up a little bit higher. And that one, everyone always complains about getting out, but as you can see, if the exhaust has been removed, you have a little bit more clearance. If you're using a 1/4-inch drive, you should be able to get on it and remove that 3rd bolt with no problems. And we're just taking these 3 13mm bolts out. Okay, so with all 3 bolts removed, you can now slide the starter away and simply just set it down, resting on the K-member here. Just make sure it doesn't fall and hit you in the head. Okay, next we're putting the starter back in. It's pretty simple, it just slides right back into its housing and put the bolts back in. Next we're ready to lift the exhaust up into place. Just make sure your exhaust gasket is up in there. We've put a piece of electrical tape up in there to hold it in place, and should be good. So we'll lift this up in there and bolt everything down. So the front bolts are in and all connected. Now we're moving here to the back. Sometimes it helps to put a jack here to hold the mid-pipe up in order to get the cat back connected. Next we're going to connect the rear O2 sensors. And so we're just plugging these back in. One on each side. And then for the fronts, a little trick I like to use is to twist them counterclockwise so that the wires bind up the incorrect way, and then when you go to put them and screw them back into these holes, the wires should end up straight. So you don't want to just put these in and tighten it, or it'll kink all those wires. So I'm going to go ahead and turn it counterclockwise a few revolutions. Put it in, and then as it straightens out, your wires will be straight. Then take your 7/8" wrench and finish tightening these O2 sensors back down. So now we're going to go ahead and lift the front of the car in the air, remove the jack stands. Alright, next connect the positive battery terminal. Tighten it down with that 8mm wrench. Now connect the negative terminal with the ground.